Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, good evening if you're somewhere else than in Sweden. Today we have another one of our research and innovation series. This is part five, the United Kingdom perspectives on research and innovation security. And we have the absolute privilege here to have Dr. Andrew James here, who is a professor of innovation management and policy at the Manchester Institute of Innovation Research at the University of Manchester. I had good fortune to speak to him before, and he is absolutely has one of the best insights in Europe on the combination between geopolitics of science, technology, innovation, and especially then, of course, in research and in research security aspects. And I think we're going to have an absolutely fantastic time, and we're going to let him start with a 20 to 25 minutes introduction. Then we're going to open up for discussions, and I would like to tell you all to use the Q&A function, and I'm going to repeat that a bit later, to write down your questions, and I will read them up for Professor James, and then he will give one of his insightful responses to that. So without much further ado, Professor James, the screen is
Okay,
yours.
thank you, Nicholas, and thanks ISDP for the invitations to speak. So I've been asked to give some UK perspectives on research and innovation security. Arguably, together with the Netherlands, the UK has the most mature system in Europe. I say arguably, maybe others would see it differently. France also has a very mature system. And I've been asked to talk both about research and innovation security. And I guess the first point to make is that they are slightly different. So starting with an overall context on the UK, successive national security strategies have emphasized the importance to the UK of identifying, nurturing, and protecting sovereign areas of strength in UK's industrial, scientific, and technological base, and that's become a stronger and stronger feature of UK policy. So the research security and the innovation security policies and practices that have been developed are complementary, and certainly with the case of universities do overlap, but there are some differences in terms of the actors and the focus. So when I'm going to talk about research security here, I have in mind policies and practices to secure research results, data, intellectual property from scientific espionage, unintentional leakage, and foreign interference. And here, research security has been mainly but not exclusively focused on universities and research institutes. So the amount of public discussion of applied research in companies is somewhat less. So I'll talk about research security. I'll also talk at the end about innovation security, by which I mean policies and practices to safeguard innovation, products and process knowledge, commercial data, intellectual property, also from industrial espionage, inadvertent loss, and also potential risks arising from foreign direct investment and licensing arrangements. And there, the performers are somewhat different. The particular focus of government policy has been around, government policy and practice has been around companies, especially early stage firms in emerging technologies, and investors. And as I go through the presentation, I will mention two particular institutions who are important in this area. One is NPSA, the National Protective Security Authority, which is a part of our internal security service, MI5, who deal with these issues. And on the cyber side, there's the National Cyber Security Center, which is part of GCHQ and deals with cyber and digital protection. So that's going to be the focus of so as I'm going through this, just remember NPSA as a key actor here. So I'll start off by discussing research security, and in doing that, going back to some contextual basics as far as the UK is concerned. So the UK consistently ranks fourth in the world for scientific research output. And international research collaboration is absolutely key to that. More than 2/3 of STEM outputs, so science, technology, engineering, maths, academic outputs, are internationally co-authored. And if you look at the development of science measured by publications, that collaborative authorship has accounted for nearly all the growth in UK science over the past 2 decades. And China is very important in this. I have a forthcoming study with colleagues at the Manchester Institute of Innovation Research looking at academic collaboration and awareness of research security. And our survey, which got 474 responses, showed that China was identified by those respondents as their single most important collaborator country. Chinese doctoral students and Chinese staff, academic staff, play a key role in UK science, and Chinese students are critical to the viability of UK universities. And indeed, this has been an ongoing source of concern by policymakers, politicians, and universities themselves. Some history on the relationship between the UK and China. If we go back to 2015, our then Chancellor of the Exchequer went to China and made what became a very famous, for some people, an infamous speech on UK policy towards China. His aspiration was that Britain could be China's best partner in the West. And this was part of a period that became known as the Golden Decade. And that Golden Decade was expressed in terms of scientific collaboration in a whole host of ways. The UK and China established a strategy for science, technology, and innovation, the first policy of its kind between China and a Western country. The number of joint academic projects was substantial and co-funded by the UK and China. The number of collaborative research centres between universities in the UK and China grew dramatically to peak at around just over 150 by 2021. And also we see in that period UK universities and academics not only being encouraged to engage with Chinese scientists, but UK universities also being encouraged to engage with Chinese companies. So you see a number of UK universities establishing engagements with Huawei, but also companies from the aerospace and defense sector, such as AVIC and AECC. So that's the Golden Decade. But at the time, and very shortly after the joint UK-China strategy for science, technology, and innovation was published, there was a significant change in UK policy, and it happened very quickly. There are those who say that we shouldn't be surprised at how quickly it changed, but for outsiders, the change was dramatic. Internally, it was the outcome of an ongoing debate that had happened within government about the appropriate relationship between the UK and China. So we move quite very rapidly from a golden decade towards an emphasis on de-risking. And there are a number of reasons for that. First of all, a change in geopolitics. So post-Brexit, we have a lot of uncertainty and inconsistency in the UK's China policy. The UK is heavily involved in the debate about Huawei and 5G telecoms infrastructure. The UK is very concerned about the national security law introduced in Hong Kong, as well as Uyghur human rights become a major issue. And you see the change happen from 2018, 2019 onwards to the point at which our integrated security review refresh in 2023 talks of China as a, quote, epoch-defining and systemic challenge. That's reflected in the emergence and the growing focus on research security. As for many other countries, ASPI's report in 2018 has a significant influence on government, on politicians, on the way that the media looks at these issues, and also is a wake-up call for UK universities as well. We see in the period 2019 to about 2022, a great deal of media attention towards UK university links with China. We see an influential report from the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee. We see think tank advocacy in this area, which changes the view and the environment towards research security. We also see the UK government play a significant role in the development of research security policies in the G7 and the OECD. So that's the context. What does the UK do in this area, and how is it responding? I think 5 points are important to emphasize in terms of the UK's approach. First of all, like many other countries, it is officially country agnostic. So if you look at most of government policy documents in this area, you do not see China mentioned. As we will see in a moment, that the UK has introduced or enhanced a whole host of legislative and non-legislative measures. The emphasis has been on those being both targeted and proportionate. There is a concern on the part of government to try to introduce, to not have this lead to a chilling effect on legitimate collaborations. There's been an emphasis on government providing support to the research sector so that it can make its own informed decisions on research collaborations, and we'll come back to how that works in a moment. And in all of this, what is striking about the UK approach is a very significant effort, both on the part of universities and our Rectors' Council and government, including NPSA, to develop a collaborative approach. So much of the policy in this area and much of the advisory documentation has been co-developed by government agencies and universities themselves. And in all of this, there has been a very conscious recognition on the part of government that universities are autonomous, they're independent, they're also very diverse. And the way that policymakers and supporters developed has been very much about recognizing the diversity of universities in terms of size, their research profile, and their administrative structures. So that's the UK's approach in general. That's been expressed in a number of developments. So 2019, the National Protective Security Authority and the National Cyber Security Center launched something called Trusted Research. Trusted Research is in essence a campaign. You can go to the Trusted Research website and download a range of material, guidance on research security for senior university leaders, guidance for academics about their responsibilities, guidance for academics on traveling abroad. This campaign was about raising awareness and was primarily targeted on raising awareness amongst university leaders in the expectation that that would lead to changes in practice. One of the responses from the university sector was that this campaign was generating questions on the part of both of universities and academics that they were not always able to address. So the government has also set up something called the Research Collaboration Advice Team. This team, which is has about 15, 16 civil servants working for it, sits in the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and its role is to act as an interface between universities and the whole of government. So if a university research office has a particular issue that it cannot resolve itself, it can put that to RCAT that will then liaise right across government to provide specialist advice, emphasizing that it is advice, not legal requirement. You also see other developments, so the expansion of certain existing activities. So we have something called the Academic Technology Approval Scheme, which means that any foreign academic visitor or student, postgraduate student undertaking certain courses in certain fields, or foreign students undertaking PhDs in certain fields, have to apply to ATAS before they then apply for a visa. So ATAS is run by the Foreign Office. There are exemptions for many countries from this, but countries including if you are a foreign visitor or student from certain countries, including China, you have to go through ATAS before you can get a visa. Like other countries, export controls have expanded recently to take in a whole variety of emerging technologies. And as I will come back to, the UK introduced a new piece of legislation, the National Security and Investment Act, which both looks at innovation security, but has also had an impact on universities as well. In all of this, we've seen responses from our research funders, not least UKRI, who have introduced trusted research and innovation principles, and have also changed the terms and conditions for academic research funding. In all of this, we've seen our Rectors Council, Universities UK, also the Russell Group, which is a grouping of leading research universities. We've seen them co-develop a lot of policy and practice with government. We've also seen the sector establish new organizations. So the Higher Education Research Security Association, previously called the Higher Education Export Control Association, is a voluntary grouping of research administrators from UK universities who come together to share practice and work very closely again with government. And then individual universities, including my own, have expanded training on research security, have set up in intranets with detailed information, and have also invested in some instances quite considerable amounts of money in staffing export control and research security offices. So, reflections on the UK experience: a real emphasis on co-development of policies and practices through engaging the university sector with government. A real emphasis on how universities can strengthen their capacity and develop skills that are necessary in this too. What is interesting here is that the UK has moved a significant way down the road in terms of its policies, its practices, and its infrastructure, but it still has some way to go in building a research security culture characterized by positive engagement by academic researchers. And this is all shown in the survey that we've done that will be part of this new study that we'll publish in a few months' time. We find that academics see benefit from research security in terms of protecting their scientific resources, but they also see considerable costs, time and effort diverted from research security, reduced freedom to select their collaborators, and also a major concern for academics in the UK is that the risk of these policies are going to lead to stereotyping of people of certain ethnicity, or colleagues of certain ethnicities and nationalities, and that is a major worry. What we also see from the survey is that despite government intent, so government's intent is to de-risk the research relationship with China, we're actually seeing decoupling. So because of the costs, the time, the effort, the concerns of academics about reputational risk and even legal liability if they fall foul of export controls, we see some decoupling of UK science from China. And that involves not only emerging risk fields and areas of traditional risk, such as aerospace engineering, it also includes low risk fields as well. And I'll come back to why that matters in a moment. There is clearly an impact of changing geopolitics on the UK's relationship with China. So a really dramatic decline in UK RI funding for UK-China research collaboration, that's shown in the figure on the right. Those joint UK-China research centres have very few have opened, a number have closed since the golden decade. UK university collaborations with Chinese companies have been closed or modified. You see that with Oxford, Imperial, you see that with Manchester as well. If you look at bibliometric evidence, you see a decline in UK-China co-authored papers, as well as I mentioned before, this chilling effect for universities and researchers who are concerned about reputational effect. There's also a concern, I think, on the part of the sector about what this means for the lived experience of Chinese colleagues and researchers in the country. So that takes me to the future of the UK-China science relationship. China remains a leading scientific collaborator for the UK. In November of last year, our Science Minister, Patrick Vallance, went to China and expressed the UK's intent that the UK wanted to seek to promote scientific cooperation in certain fields. So those fields were the medical sector, fields like astronomy, environmental sciences, climate science. However, as our survey shows, even those fields, scientists are pulling back from collaboration with China. So it will be interesting to see whether we see this aspiration on the part of the UK towards promoting collaboration in low-risk fields. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. As far as next steps for research security policy are concerned, the National Security Strategy in 2025 announced that the UK would be publishing its first research security strategy. And the aim is to set out the government's domestic and international policy on research security. The expectation is that that will come out later this year. That same document, the National Security Strategy, also expressed the UK government's intent to expand its international capacity building program. So already the UK government, through the Science and Technology Network, has been engaged in capacity building with allies, and it seeks to expand that. And there is also a talk of the establishment of a research security fund to support capacity building in the UK. So that's where we are with research security, a pretty mature system in terms of policy, practice, and infrastructure, but still some way to go in terms of embedding that in academic research culture, and also a number of open questions in terms of the UK's future academic relationship with China. Nicholas also asked me to talk about innovation security, and I'll spend a few moments on that before I wrap up. So, innovation security has a different focus. As I said at the outset, it is more about emerging tech startup and scale-up companies in emerging technology sectors and funders, although universities, where they engage in spin-outs and where they retain a beneficial ownership arrangement in those spin-outs, are actually also impacted by innovation security. So two main points around innovation security. The first is that the UK is very active in a Five Eyes partnership campaign called Secure Innovation. The aim of this campaign is to provide guidance and advice to early stage emerging technology companies and investors with the aim of protecting their innovations. Like trusted research, there is also a Secure Innovation online portal hosted by NPSA, which provides guidance for companies, investors, and also allows companies to engage in a so-called Secure Innovation Action Plan to think through the actions they should take. And interestingly, there is also a scheme called the Secure Innovation Security Reviews Scheme, where government part funds security reviews for early stage technology organizations. So the companies have to pay a modest amount, under £1,000, I believe, to have a authorized, approved security reviewer come in and look at their practices and processes and provide advice. The other major aspect of innovation security policy in the UK was the introduction of the National Security and Investment Act. So this is a foreign direct investment screening act, similar to that which has been introduced in Sweden and a number of other countries. This is about scrutinizing it and giving government power to intervene in certain acquisitions and also some licensing arrangements that are deemed as potentially harmful to the UK's national security. So if you are acquiring a UK business, you are legally required to tell the government about those acquisitions of certain qualifying entities in 17 sensitive areas. And some of those sensitive areas include AI and quantum and so on and so forth, as well as defense activities. This is also country agnostic. If you're a UK investor wanting to do this, you also have to go through the same process as a overseas investor. So if you look at notifications in the last financial year, you'll see that most of them relate to the defense sector. 1/5 of them relate to critical suppliers to government, and a number are related to military and dual use. If you look at those who've been called, those transactions that have been called in for a more in-depth review by government, it's interesting that almost half of those have been UK companies where government want to scrutinize the transaction in greater detail, followed by China, which is about 1/3 of the transactions, despite Chinese acquirers representing well below 5% of all notifications. So I've covered research security in depth, also touched on innovation security, and we'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's incredibly interesting, and I think it's very valuable to listen into the UK experience. And it is a more mature system than many others have, and I think that there's a lot to be learned from how the UK has approached. I mean, just I have already a few, and I should also say that please, if you have any questions in the audience, please go to the Q&A and ask questions. We already received a few, so please you use the Q&A. But I mean, we just speak a lot about China here. The first thing I think about is are the others that could be challenging? I mean, you have Russia, Iran, of course, but are the others problematic states that we need to include? And in that case, are they different from China? And that question goes really into a question by George Sixt, who is asking, how do the much more aggressive US policies impact UK policies? After all, the US is the biggest collaborator in UK research. I mean, this is a question about a former or a current ally that has made our lives a bit more problematic recently.
Okay, so a good question. So as the person posing the question points out, I mean, the US is one of the UK's major scientific collaborators, a little fractionally behind China now. Yeah, the US's policy positions is having an impact on academic attitudes towards collaboration with the US. And it's having an impact in several different ways. You know, those. So, and remember, I mean, UK academics have, for a long time engaged with Department of Defense and Department of Energy contracts, DARPA contracts. They are significant. As for Sweden and other countries, National Institutes of Health contracts have been extremely important. Like other principal investigators and co-investigators in other European countries, many UK academics received a somewhat bizarre questionnaire last year, focused on the one hand, their equality, diversity policies, and on the other hand, their policies towards China. And that was seen as a very strong signal from the US about its attitudes towards collaboration. There are general concerns. So in the survey, I was surprised at how many academics said that they were cautious about traveling to the United States, how they withdrawn from scientific conferences, how those who did travel to the US were now following the same practices that they had traditionally been expected to pursue in going to some other countries, including China. So it is very common now for academics to take blank laptops, burner phones, and other things. So it is a major concern for the nature of European science and UK science as to the way that academics are very, very cautious now towards engagement with the US, which is hugely unfortunate and down very much to the dramatic change in policy stance of the US in the last 12 to 18 months.
Well, we have a few more here. Richard Lariviere, given the National Intelligence Law of the PRC passed in 2017, doesn't this identify very high risk for UK or any nation? Collaborative research with the CCP, especially in areas of machine learning, AI, and other dual-use technologies.
That's being expressed in is one of the factors which is influencing UK research security policy. Export control policies and research security policies have expanded now to include a number of emerging technology areas that weren't previously involved. And yes, the UK, I think, is very conscious of those developments in China's policy.
We have Julian Prieto who's asking, what is your perspective on ATAS being an example of the UK moving away from its country-agnostic principle of the research security framework? It is particularly interesting to see that almost all countries exempt from ATAS are located in the global north.
You're correct in that. So ATAS. So what are views on ATAS? The scope of ATAS has expanded in the last 5 years, 6 years. There are exemptions, yes, for European countries, for North American countries, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. China is within scope of ATAS, as are several other countries, Pakistan included amongst them. ATAS has very practical implications for the UK science system. It makes it more difficult to offer visiting positions and more difficult and uncertain to offer visiting positions to scientists from certain countries. I think some universities have experienced losing out on staff and promising PhD students. So this sort of waterbed effect where the higher barriers to entry posed by ATAS cause students and others to go to other countries who don't have similar regulatory arrangements. There's also a concern that ATAS is not frustration on the part of academics and research administrators that ATAS isn't particularly transparent. So you get a yes, no, without actually understanding the underlying reasons for that decision.
When you say underlying motivations, do you have an anonymous participant here who's asking, what were the underlying motivations for establishing such a policy framework in the UK? And I think that's the research security framework.
As a whole, or ATAS in particular?
I think that this is more as a whole.
The underlying, I mean, obviously the UK has had export controls for a very long time, and larger research intensive universities have always had export control officers. The general expansion of research security policies in the UK can be traced back to 2017, 2018, where I think not only the UK, but other countries as well, became increasingly aware of the potential national security and economic security risks of the behaviors of certain foreign countries. I think in general terms and political terms, the publication of the ASPI report in 2018 had a big impact. And I think that it's also, UK's membership of G7, and I think particularly the Five Eyes was influential on UK changes in UK approach as well.
Christian Wolf Suzuki is asking, and I'm very much interested in this myself. Based on the UK experience, what would be your advice for other countries like Germany, and of course Sweden in my case, who are still at the more initial stage in the process of building up centralized structures for research security?
Okay, three things
$1 million question.
Yeah, okay, so three things come to mind immediately. The first of which is it's absolutely critical that that government and the research performing sector co-develop policy and practice. So from the very earliest stage, NPSA and wider government recognized that this was only going to be, they recognized first of all that they didn't understand universities particularly well, and that they also understood that only by getting universities on board would any of these policies be effective. So first major learning from the UK is that government and the sector need to work together. And there are a number of committees and fora that have been established between government and the sector to enhance enhance cooperation. Whilst, and I think some of those who are involved in that who I know would also be keen for me to say that co-development, co-design and cooperation doesn't mean that the two sides always agree. But we have fora in which people can actually come together and share concerns as well as positive, constructive dialogue. So that's the first thing. Second thing, which is, I think, really important is, and Sweden has to some extent done this, as of the Czech Republic, be really aware of the need to build capacity and provide public resource to support capacity building. So whether capacity building is increasing the number of export control officers and research security officers in universities, but also in research funders and in government itself, that's really important. And export control officers are really hard to come by. It's a very specific skill set, and universities who develop people with those skills find that they then get poached for higher paid jobs, either in government or the private sector. There's also capacity building around building training programs, and whether that training is done by individual universities or in the UK through our academic research security association. So I think capacity building is very important. I think the other thing which is really important is having a government advisory organization such as RCAT. So the Research Collaboration Advice Team was something that the UK sector itself asked for as a way, and again, to say RCAT does not have statutory powers to enforce anything, but it's really very important to the UK universities as giving advice, and advice from across government. As anybody who works in this area knows, one of the big issues is the interface with the security services. This allows this system allows university to receive from RCAT advice and guidance that also includes advice and guidance from our security services. And I think that's really important. So those three things.
Excellent. We have a question from Melita Pachulia. How should research security frameworks adapt to the growing overlap between cyber threats and information manipulation, where attacks are not just about stealing data, but also about manipulating narratives and undermining trust in research? I mean, it strikes me, well, we see when we talk about undermining trust in research, we see on the other side of the pond there's a bit of skepticism against research right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, public trust in science and kind of pseudoscience narratives is an issue which has existed for some time. In terms of foreign interference and intervention in the research process, this is something which is also of concern. And maybe a point I should have made is that until relatively recently, most of the attention of government and arguably universities as well, and research funders, has been around the possibility of scientific espionage, including cyber threats or inadvertent sharing of knowledge through collaborations. In the last 12 months, foreign interference in universities and in university research has become a much bigger and publicly debated issue in the UK. There have been a couple of high-profile incidents, not least efforts by Chinese security services to influence some research on supply chains in China that was being undertaken by academics in a UK university. That's led to a lot of attention being paid to foreign interference in a way that arguably it was given less attention in trusted research until relatively recently. So a lot of concern about foreign interference now. Government has the government has announced relatively recently essentially a hotline for universities to approach government on concerns around foreign interference, as well as some investment in that area. And I think that, well, I know that there is going to be guidance coming out on foreign interference in the next few months. As to the wider issue of cyber interference in society, I mean, that is generally regarded as an issue in the UK too, but goes well beyond research security.
We have the final question here from Kuram Shamim. And when we had our last discussion together, I asked you the same question. How has the UK balanced the need of small, mid-sized and large universities, given the different needs of each type of university research institution? Some might have specific research areas, the amount of students, researchers at the university, amount of funding sources, etc. How has the UK balanced this? And I mean, you've already responded to some of this, but
yeah, well, so Sharim, I mean, that's a very good point, and it's very important, and it is an issue in the UK as it is in other countries. So I led a study looking at research security policies in 7 European countries, including Sweden, and this issue comes out. Yes, large universities, so the likes of Manchester, invest considerable amounts of time, effort, and money in research security. We have a global research footprint and collaborations that mean that we have to do that. And in the UK system, that is funded by universities. So there is no source of government funding at the moment for any of that. That becomes a much, much bigger issue if you're a small university. The cost of employing 1 or 2 people is considerable, especially if you don't have much of a particularly well-developed research footprint. It's often, and government policy very much emphasizes, as I said at the outset, on the diversity of universities in terms of their size and research profile. If you look at universities with smaller universities, those with less international research collaboration, it is very difficult for them. Arguably, they are the ones who are most at risk.
Then, of course, there's always a risk then that you infiltrate an institution or research university that has less capacity, and then to reach out to others, of course.
There is undoubtedly that. I mean, there are. I was in a workshop the other day, and we were thinking through exactly this issue and what we might do about it. In some areas, or in some other areas of research policy for universities in the UK, including, for instance, commercialization of technology, large universities can receive funding for supporting smaller institutions in their activities. And certainly one of my senior colleagues was speculating as to whether that model might potentially be used in the UK also. We talked about this research security fund that may well be announced in the UK. that will no doubt seek to address some of these capacity issues. But yeah, it's an issue. And I know in Sweden that some of your smaller universities have talked about and maybe are now implementing grouping together to generate shared research security resources, which I think also makes a lot of sense.
One thing that you mentioned that intrigued me a bit. I mean, you said it was a tendency of pulling back on research with China, even in less sensitive areas. I mean, why is this the case? Is it, are we,
Because because academics perceive that there is a high administrative cost to going through compliance processes required to work with China. They also perceive that some of their universities are simply anxious about any collaboration with China for reputational reasons. There are, academics are like others. They are aware of geopolitics. They also perceive the way the world is moving, and that is causing them to think twice as well.
so it's not necessarily pressure, for example, from US institutions, or that collaboration with the US is made more difficult if you have collaboration with China, or
Um, that isn't something that, so we did this survey and we also interviewed 31 people. That wasn't something that we heard. That doesn't mean it's not an issue, but it wasn't something that was shared with us.
how do you then, as a final, I mean, how do we make this a bit more positive in a sense? We're talking about the challenges and all this. I mean, how do we strengthen international research collaboration, and how do we, because as you said in the beginning, I mean, we're a lot of this innovation and innovative research that we're looking at is done in a collaboration.
I think that international organizations such as the OECD, the G7, and particularly the EU have a really, really important role to play. So all the suite of initiatives that the Commission has been is introducing in the area of research security, I think is very positive. I think as you then have Australia becoming an associate member of Horizon, that then broadens to include Australia as well as Canada, Japan, others. So I think finding ways of developing mutually acceptable, mutually understood research security policies and practices, and as best as we can, standardizing those practices across countries will, I think, help enhance confidence in and support for international research collaboration going forward. I should also say one other thing is that universities and academics in the UK are very clear on one thing, that they want to continue, despite my point about anxiety and pullback, there is still a recognition that in an increasing number of fields of science, China is the leader in the world and will remain so and will become even more so. And there does remain an appetite amongst many academics to continue collaboration. And frankly, for the future of global science, that is something that we need to enable. So the evidence that there is a chilling effect on collaboration with China, I think, should actually be a concern to all of us.
Well, And with that actually very positive note in the end, we have reached the final comment from on this subject. And I mean, I think this has been, I mean, Professor James has given us a very, very clear and instructive outline how possibly we can act in the rest of the world and how UK definitely have acted. And I think that there's a lot of lessons learned here, um, especially as the UK has a great deal of experience. So, I mean, please join me in thanking Professor James for an absolutely thrilling introduction. And then please come in and listen to our other presenters. And hopefully we will also have a bit more research on this topic that will come out. So, but thank you, Andrew, for this absolutely outstanding presentation.
Thanks, Nicholas.